Welcome to Choppin It Up, a podcast powered by Journey, where we talk about freight, how people got to where they are, and their career journeys, pun intended. All right, let's chop it up. Today on Choppin It Up, we have Kristy Knichel, President and CEO of Knichel Logistics. Kristy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it was so fun to finally meet you in person at TIA in April, and I appreciate you taking some time to tell us a little bit about your story. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. It's, I think, exciting to finally meet you and get to talk with you a little bit more because we didn't get a whole lot of time to talk.
Yeah, this will be good. So we always start chopping it up with a fun fact. So tell us a fun fact about Kristy.
I think the most interesting fun fact is that I have a full back tattoo.
Oh, wow. That's super cool.
Yeah. It's definitely not what you would typically see probably on a woman, let alone someone maybe in my position. So yeah, definitely interesting. Father was not too thrilled about that, but I can tell you from a professional standpoint, that's why I put it on my back so he couldn't complain.
I love it. You got to be yourself. I bet that hurt. I feel like a full back tattoo it's got to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is. But interesting enough, I got pretty relaxed just doing it 2.5 hours at a time. So it took a while.
Awesome. Well, that's a really cool fun fact. I appreciate you sharing. We normally start diving into personal background. So I know a little bit about you. Would love to just learn origin story type stuff, early life, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So, yeah, I guess so. Early on, I was actually born in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. My father actually moved to Pittsburgh when I was maybe about 4. He actually worked for the Katy Railroad at the time. Okay. So growing up, going through high school and all that, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work. So I actually did work release when I was 16 in high school and just went to work at noon when we were released. And when I was 18, wanted to live on my own. So I worked 2 and 3 jobs. And with that being said, too, I did actually try out college initially. I went to Indiana University, a PA for criminology. Had a bad experience, unfortunately, that first year. So I quit and then I moved back home. And then I decided to go to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh for fashion.
Nice.
Interesting enough, I was running a couple pizza shops and one of the owners wanted to sell the pizza shop. And I just told my dad, like, hey, I really want to buy this pizza shop at 19. And I think it was really cool. The guy was making like $45,000 a year, which I thought was a lot of money, I guess, at 19. So
yeah.
Interesting enough, my dad said that he used to own a pizza shop bar in New Jersey, which I had no clue he did back when he was younger. And he's like, this is not what you want to do for the rest of your life. And this wouldn't be fun. So he said, why don't you come work for me? And that's really how I got my career started. And ultimately, I did quit the second school. So I never did graduate college or anything like that, but just went straight to work when I was 19 for him. And this is where I'm at today.
I love that. See, we could be talking about a pizzapreneur right now. We ended up with freight.
Right. Well, maybe down the road, that'll be one of my projects when I retire or something, finally owning a pizza shop, but maybe not actually working in it, but,
Absolutely.
giving someone an opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay. So your dad was in transportation when you were 19. Tell us a little bit about what the business was at that point when you got involved.
Yeah, sure. So my dad actually was a founding member of Cornerstone Systems based out of Memphis, Tennessee. And he was an agent for that company at the time. So that was in 97. And then in 2003 was when my dad decided to go out and open Knichel Logistics because I worked for him. My brother and my sister also worked for him as well and wanted to leave a legacy for us. And if he retired, wasn't sure what was going to happen to us within that agent model.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, 2003 was when Knichel was born and when we started the journey.
That's awesome. Okay. So when you were 19, what was the first role that you took on inside of Knichel?
Yeah, so the first role was an intermodal dispatcher. I came in and started dispatching the freight on the trains, doing that piece of work. But very quickly, it was then kind of going into sales and then eventually HR, credit collections, pricing at some point. I've worked every role within the company that we have. I would say, other than the LTL that we have now, that came well beyond after we started, but even booked trucks in the brokerage side as well.
Yeah,
So yeah, basically touched every piece of it as I moved up and worked, or I guess had multiple hats
totally.
as well, doing 2, 3 things at a time.
That's awesome. I love to learn about how people get to where they are in the different parts of the story. So when you first started as an intermodal dispatcher, what type of business was Knichel running outside of that intermodal stuff that you all started with?
So the business that we were running was really food product rice. Like the company was built on just shipping rice out of Northern California.
Got it.
And all we did was intermodal shipping at the time
Okay.
as well.
Okay, cool. And so today, obviously, you mentioned LTL, brokerage, full suite of services. How long was it from when you started to the next layers of services that you all started to take on?
I would say it was probably like 2009, maybe 2008 for the LTL. The truckload was a little bit sooner than that. I would say maybe 2007, specifically because the needs of our intermodal customers, they wanted us to do the truckload, they wanted us to do the LTL. So it really was just like an ancillary service of that for those customers. And that it didn't like grow tremendously. It was just kind of intermodal was still our thing, and we were doing these for those customers and not necessarily selling it at the time, even though we would bring it up on sales calls. And today, like intermodal is still our niche and the biggest piece of what we do, but obviously it has grown the other two modes, over the years, a lot bigger than what they were back then. So,
Totally.
and I would still say a big piece of those the brokerage and the LTL was still is the intermodal customer base that we have.
Absolutely. It's always good to be able to rely on your niche and dig in on those particular things because it's a tough sales environment. It's really hard to be generally a transportation provider and not be really good at one thing that you can go to market with. So it's really cool that you all had that and you've had it since the beginning. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say one of the interesting things about intermodal is, I mean, nowadays you can't get a Union Pacific contract, and a lot of companies like us have either sold to other bigger companies or whatnot, but there's only 17 companies like us that are non-asset based that actually have the Union Pacific contract to move freight on the railroad, which I think is very
Huge.
unique. Yeah.
I love a good differentiator. We do a lot of fun conversations where you start to peel back layers with clients and talk about what they do specifically. But the ones that do the best have core differentiators. Like there's something that they provide that their clients really don't get anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that, we're out there competing against the big billion-dollar companies and we're able to compete. I always say we're big enough to compete, but small enough to give you the service that you need. And who would have thought, we started a company, I think maybe doing 2 million our first year and then growing to the 100 million mark in 2022. And the majority of that being on the railroad. And some of those customers today, are customers my father had prior to us opening the business. So for like 30 years, very loyal,
Love
dedicated
that.
customers. Yeah.
Okay. So you got me excited just thinking about 2003, your dad going out to say, hey, let's build something that legacy based the family can build around for years to come, all the way up to $100 million company, which it's so hard to scale.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get to that number. It's really, really challenging. So let's talk about road markers throughout the way to get there. Early on, was it 2003 that you said, well, what year did you start there?
It was 2000. Well, I started in 97
Okay, cool. All
and
right.
then we
So
opened in 2003.
perfect. So let's go through how we get from a $2 million business to $100 million business. That's an incredible journey. So I'd love to hear, let's chat like the first couple years early on in the scaling part.
Yeah, so the first couple of years, my dad is a salesperson, by trade, and that was probably the one thing he was really good at. So he was, I would say, I was just very grateful he was able to open the business, because that's not easy either. It wasn't easy, or it's not easy even back then to get real contracts, but because of his connections, he was able to do that. Which can be challenging. But soon as we opened, he hired 2 salespeople that had worked with him over the years at a couple other IMCs back in the day that no longer exist, like Fort Pitt Consolidators and National Piggyback. And I think that was like the first real spot where we saw like a lot of our growth come in, because we brought in 2 salespeople that had been in the industry. They knew how to sell it. And we were easily able to start growing, not just the customer base we have, but expanding, because it wasn't just my dad. And I was then traveling with my dad as well. I would say probably about 2005, 2006, to start seeing all the customers that he had, at least, and with some of the other salespeople that we had as well, so that I could continue to grow that base. I was also dispatching at the same time, but just learn that aspect of it and why it's so important. So just adding that sales layer in particular was huge for us to start that growth. And it was interesting, like when you think about this as an agent, we were just running the same amount of business. I mean, yes, it was growing, but not to the tune of once we opened. I mean, we had double-digit growth year over year. So it was very interesting to see how that kind of came to fruition. But again, it's like hiring the right people, bringing in the sales team that knew what to do. I know one of the guys that worked for us had the Toys R Us account back in the day, and I think he moved like 30 million in revenue with them. Now, granted, we did not when he was with us, but had a lot of knowledge and was able to really build that up. And then I think along the way, probably within the 3rd year, bringing them on too, then that's kind of where the truck piece came into play, where not only did we expand with our intermodal customers that were asking, it was also bringing in different opportunities that we weren't moving at the time, because the other salespeople were able to target different accounts that we didn't have already in our book. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So there's a lot that had to develop over the years for you all to get to the point where you are today. $100 million company, tons of customer density, lots of modes. Let's call it mid 2000s, maybe early 2010s or so. Is there a moment where you felt the pivot towards we're really ramping up? Like something happened, whether it be a couple of key hires, maybe a couple of key accounts that started trending up towards the $100 million mark?
Yeah, I would say definitely bringing in some additional people, because we just were getting more requests. I wouldn't say there was necessarily a certain person in general, but we had marketing, started putting some marketing out there and doing all those things. But in 2007, I was appointed the president of the company.
Nice.
Yes. And my father, I would say like he stepped back, but like he wasn't in the office running the company per se, but I still wasn't able to make some decisions that like I should have. And he was still, calling me and stuff. But I would say one of the things too was at the time my dad had appointed my brother COO, and my brother was definitely not fit for that job, nor did he want that job. My dad just put him in that job. And I had to ask my dad to bring in help. I really needed someone who knew how to do that, had more experience, because again, this is my first job in logistics, and I only know what I know and what my dad knows and what he's teaching me. So we did bring in someone from the outside that did own his own company at the time. And initially it was some good help to kind of get things ramped up, continuing to grow the business out, and just looking at different opportunities that maybe we didn't see before, again, like on the truckload side, the LTL side. And the LTL side was very small, so it was hard for us to compete in that arena at times. But, eventually we did do an agreement with Blue Grace Logistics where we became a franchise for them to grow that out. And that also started to expand our growth quite a bit as well. But yeah, I wouldn't say there was one thing to put on it, but I really think it's a combination of having the sales team really go out and look at different accounts that they could bring in. And a lot of our focus is on food and beverage. So I think it was easier for us to be able to sell into those markets. And we really focused on the rice. Like, what other rice accounts can we bring in? Because we're already doing a ton of that. And then also expanding into other products that they had, like the Asian food products coming out of LA.
I like what you mentioned about being really good at a couple of modes and being really good at a couple of commodities, because those stories translate from account to account. And it's a whole lot easier to walk into a company that does the same thing as, call it your top 3 or 4 types of customers, because they get that you understand how their business works. And it's so much easier to relate your expertise in that manner.
Yeah, no, I agree. And my dad was able to speak some of the language. I mean, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, like enough to just show that respect. And
Yeah.
also, we did some marketing in Asian magazines, even like specifically to that product and what we were doing, because I feel like it's not a hard product, but we specialize in it and we understand it and we know it. And I think when customers know that, they feel more comfortable giving you business and growing with you.
Absolutely. So I have a hot take, and I think that you will agree with this based on some of the things I just learned about your involvement in the business early on from a sales capacity. So the clients that we work with today that do really, really well have massive engagement at the owner and executive level in the sales motion. They are very involved. They know their top accounts. They're on the road seeing those clients. And it sounds like from an early age, you were doing that with your dad and doing that with sales reps. So you're close to the revenue generating piece of the business. How impactful do you think that is to the growth of the org?
Oh my gosh, it's huge. And I guess like now that I think about it, because I've been doing this 26 years, so sometimes it's hard to think back and like, what are all the things we've done? But like another thing I can talk to about that point is like, I put myself out there. I started speaking at events. I was asked to speak for like a bank panel that we had. And I remember my dad sitting there, like watching me. And I'm like, oh my God, like I was so nervous.
Yeah,
I didn't want to do it. Like, I never really wanted to put myself out there, but I knew how important it was. And it was never easy, but I just continued to do it. And I do think being in front of the customers, because one of those customers back then is our largest customer today still, and I still go see them. And I think it's huge. And there's so many CEOs, owners out there that don't do this. And I remember being on a panel a couple years ago at the TMSA event, and people in the audience were asking me, how can we get our CEO to do what you're doing, to be out there traveling, talking to the customers, speaking. And the thing is, it's not like you can force them. They have to see the benefit and want to do it. And as much as I wasn't, say, that salesperson or had all the expertise to do it, I put myself in front of it. I learned it. And every time I walked into a customer, we walked out with another opportunity.
yeah.
So it's huge. It's absolutely huge. Probably the most important thing that I can do. So I work very closely with my director of sales and the sales team. They actually worked under me until last year when I hired the director of sales finally. And then we also have an agent side as well that I didn't talk about that we brought on, but I also work with that side because we get a lot of agents that come our way because they do see me out there and doing all the different things that I'm doing, whether it's speaking and podcasts, panels,
Oh, yeah.
awards. A lot of awards we also marketed as well to try to win. And again, all those things make you become more successful.
I love it because I can tell the passion and intensity you have for the business. And you've been running this business for quite some time. And until last year, the sales team reported to you, which I absolutely love, because without new business and without expanding current relationships, our businesses are dead. There's nothing for us to do if we're not going to go get new business. And
Yep.
sometimes people lose sight of that. And obviously, you and the organization have not. So it's really cool to learn the background.
Well, yeah, and I have the last name of the company, right? So I definitely can get some more doors open.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, like, if someone in the org sends an email and maybe they don't get a response, and I send one, I get a response pretty fast, you know?
Yep.
So I think that's like the biggest tool any company needs to use. Like, you have to, as the owner or CEO, be close to the customers, work with the sales team, like do what you can to bring that business on because it works. You know, it's so important.
I love it. Okay, so since 2007, in 2007 you became president, now CEO and president of the organization. Early on, a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
What was the hardest thing about taking a massive leadership role relatively early on in your tenure with the organization?
I think the hardest thing was being put in a role and not really having the experience or, say, a mentor. I talk a lot about my dad being a mentor in some ways of not what to do or not, what to do, because he didn't do things the way I would have, or he was a sales guy at the end of the day. So there were some things I could pick up from him, but not really having someone to go to. I had to really force myself to figure it out. I went through the Sandler Sales School. I eventually found myself like a mentor, which my dad didn't really want to pay for, but I needed someone to help me with direction because, I think I even told Nate Schutz, like I Googled, what does a CEO do? Because I didn't even know.
It's amazing.
You know what I
It's
mean? Like I
amazing.
didn't know, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I did so much stuff like that was on my
Right.
plate. But I think that was the eye-opening thing because I did mention about bringing in that other guy to do the COO role. And he knew what my weaknesses were. And part of that was the finance area. So I kind of let that go and let him handle it. And ultimately, it turned out to be a bad thing that I did that. Ultimately, I realized he was not the right person. I had to let him go. My dad was fighting me on it. And after that, which was early 2014, I literally had to sit myself down and say, okay, I need to know every aspect of this, and worked with I had a CFO or an outside fractional CFO that taught me everything I needed to know. It still can be challenging at times because numbers aren't my thing, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think just not knowing the stuff and thinking I didn't have to know it.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that you have to know every aspect of your business. You don't have to be the expert, but know enough to be dangerous.
I agree. You've got to have that foundational knowledge so that if
Right.
something, you give it the eye test and it looks off, if you don't have that foundational knowledge, you would have no reason to know that it wasn't going in the right direction.
Correct. Exactly. And I will say in 2013, prior to me letting that guy go, it was also eye-opening because that guy put us in a position with our bank and the line of credit where I had to sit with my dad in front of the bank. And, I don't ever want to have to be in that position again because of decisions that were made that I wasn't really understanding or, made aware of, and not having a strong financial controller either that was giving me the correct numbers even at the time.
Right.
So there's so many things there, but I'm just like, okay, I have to figure this out and know all of it to enough degree that I can really, make decisions and figure out, do I have the right people, the right situation going on? What does it mean? All of that.
I love it. Well, kudos to you for taking that responsibility to learn those other things because it's uncomfortable, taking on these new skills, or if there's a certain style of the business or type of the business, you're like, this isn't really my thing. You don't really have a choice. Like, we got to figure out how to make it
Right.
work.
Exactly. And that is how I felt, right? But I knew I had to do it because I always felt in my heart like I have all these people that work for me and I have to show up for them. And that year, just going back to like, say, my biggest challenge, I know you didn't ask me that, but
It was on the way. It was on the way.
So my biggest challenge was because of the decisions that guy made, it put me in a position where I had to lay off 18 people. And one of them is my marketing woman today. And we did get to rehire her back, but it was the most horrible day of my life. I don't ever want to be in a position where decisions we make cause us to have to let people go and affect their lives.
Yeah. There is a level of responsibility you have to have as an owner, an executive of a business, where the decisions you make impact all of the people that really are in your business because they trust you, and
Right.
they're there because you've given them an opportunity to take care of their family or grow their career. And when you have to make decisions that might put them in a position where they're unable to do those things, it's gut wrenching, the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, it was. And that's why we had to get rid of this guy. And ultimately, even though I had, the title, so to speak, my dad was really the problem, and having to have meetings with him, with my brother, with John, who is now my current COO. And ultimately, my dad still didn't want me to let him go. And I just had to go in and fire him without my dad. And I just did it. And he was not happy with me. But it's like, I'm the one who's here living this
Yeah.
daily. So that was, I would say, the challenging thing, but also the turning point of all of that, learning the financials, all these different things that came along with it, and really realizing, like, because I was 19, I was a hard worker, but I felt
Yeah.
like I still didn't really know, like, what do I have here? And this could be something big, and I don't want to mess it up and cause issues for people's lives too, because of decisions that were made and people I trust that brought in the company.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier, Googling what's a CEO supposed to do, right? You're like, I have to figure out how to do all this stuff. Where or when do you feel you felt most comfortable in your role where you're like, all right, I got this. Yes, I ask questions, and yes, I need to build a good team, but I feel confident in my ability to do this.
Yeah, I would probably say, I think this is something that we always talk about. I think women in particular, like imposter syndrome of never feeling like you have enough. Because one of the things, before I answer that, one of the things my dad did was he chose me to run the company, but yet he would be like, we need to hire people with college degrees and experience. And I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I had to prove myself to him. So I worked even harder to do that. I would probably say it was after I made that decision in 2014 and put John, who works for me now, in that role, and continued to just do whatever I had to educate myself to move forward. So, I mean, I know that started in 2014, so it's probably more like 2015 going into
Yeah.
2016 that I felt more like empowered, that I knew what I had to do, and just reaching out to more people finally too, and like having conversations and not being afraid to say, what am I supposed to do? Like, what things should I be looking at? Because I never really had that person to tell me this is what you should be looking at on a daily basis until, like, I had the CFO and he was telling me what numbers I need to look at. And, so it was just a very long, rocky, hard, challenging path to get to where I am today. But I would say probably 2016-ish was probably the year where I felt more comfortable of, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I was still doing a lot of things I shouldn't have.
Ah,
You have to get stuff off your plate, or even running the sales team till last year. Like,
yeah.
I just had so many things going on that I also felt like I was doing a disservice to the team, even though the team was very, they had been around a long time in the industry. It was just, my dad was always a commission sales guy, and hey, they don't need to be babysat. The numbers will tell a story. Well, that's great. But I also feel like there's things they need to be doing and be accountable for,
Oh, yeah.
paying them. So it was hard to kind of give them the time that they truly needed, because I was still doing so many different things as well. But now that we brought that director of sales in just recently, I will say, like, I feel like I'm in the place I need to be, and I can actually do what I completely should be doing.
I love that. There is certainly an evolution where you need to be able to pass things on and say, this is your responsibility. You oversee things, you're involved. But to scale and grow, we only have so much time in the day. And as the owner and CEO, you need to be architecting the plan and then making sure it's executed. And you've got to have really strong leaders out there owning whichever piece of the business that you've entrusted them with building. So it's really cool to hear your team's at the point where you're like, all right, this is your thing. You got to go do that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the cool thing too is, like, half my staff or around there has been with me probably 9 to 24 years. And the
Love
other
that.
half, yeah. And the other half, the last few years with the growth and stuff. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, I think, for all of us working together as a leadership team and working together. I will say the other part of that, though, too, is, like, as we continue to grow, who we were when there was 10 of us, 15 of us is not going to be the same as we continue to grow, because we have 57 people now, and want to get, my goal is to get to 300 million by 2030.
Let's go. It's got me
Yeah.
fired up.
Yeah.
I love
Exactly.
that. Okay, so what do you think needs to happen in your business to get you to 300 million? Did you say by 2030?
Yes.
What do you
So
think needs to happen?
what needs to happen is we were focusing on growing out our brokerage, focusing on growing out the LTL, but mainly the brokerage. And we've decided to not continue to focus 100% on growing that out because it's taken all of our time away from our niche and what we really do well. So we're going to focus on the niche on the intermodal side, have target customers. We have a very streamlined plan. And I'm clearly part of that plan, being out in front of customers, traveling with the sales team, going to events, that type of thing, and continuing to put myself out there. So I think we have a really good plan now. I think, because I look at it this way, like we had so many intermodal customers that ship over the road, and customers never looked at us as an over the road, brokerage or company, even though we do some for those customers. So even when the market flipped, some of those customers, we didn't get the truck business when it went off rail. Right. And it was a challenge. And I think the other part of that is there's all these billion-dollar companies out there. They're getting bigger and bigger, and we're not like focusing on anything in particular in truckload. We're just doing what everyone else is on the dry van and some reefer. But I just feel like where we can really excel is the intermodal and what we do well. And let's just continue to focus on that. And on the truckload side, it's not that we're getting rid of it, but what we do really over there is volume dedicated drop trailer business. And let's focus on that and still service the intermodal customers that have needs that come up, obviously. And then the LTL, we do a good bit of LTL that's transactional, and we've also changed to a model of more managed LTL business. So I think we just onboarded our first one.
Congrats.
Thank you. So my director of sales comes from a background there. So that has kind of helped us too. I think he was shocked when he saw how much transactional business we did. But again, we didn't know, right? Like this is what we do. So I think now, like putting the leadership team together, having these offsite meetings, really talking about it. And we are bootstrapped too. So like the other part of that is I'm going to need more and more and more money to grow out the over the road. And it's going to be really challenging to compete against these big companies that are out there moving freight for nothing, trying to gain market share. On the intermodal, we are also competing against big companies too, but we also share in a lot of the business with those bigger companies because we can do the job that these customers want. Sometimes we might not be the price that they want during the market, but we can still be competitive.
I like it. There's a lot to be said about focusing on your niche, and a lot to be said about what happens when, let's say, we're spending 80% of our time or 70% of our time all across all these different modes, all across all these different commodities, and say, no, do what we're good at, and you'll see the business thrive. There's a lot to be said about that level of focus because it's tough to do when you're spread thin and trying to be everything for everyone.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it turned into just because of, we were picking up more and more business on the other two sides from those customers. And it's like, oh, look how much more business we could get and how big that market is. Because the intermodal piece of the big pie, I want to say is like 4%, but it's still like $1 trillion number or $1 billion number. It's massive. Huge. So it's like, why not be, if these customers are saying, I use, a JB Hunt Schneider hub, Knichel should be the name too that they throw out there. And I want to make sure that our name is one of those names that is said in a part of all this where they don't just think about the asset only carriers. So
I like it. So talk to me a little bit about your leadership and your style of leadership when you think about the team that you have.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll go back to talk about my dad a little bit. My dad was in Vietnam. He was a police officer. He had a very militant style of training and teaching us. And I will say, I think I am the leader I am today because of him, because he was so hard on me. Mm-hmm. But the way that he treated people or did things was definitely not the way I would have. Like he would stand behind people and watch them work. Make sure they're doing things perfectly. Yes, very strict. He would do anything for anyone, but he also yelled a lot, make some of the women cry. Just not a good environment. So I knew when I got in charge that that's not how I wanted to be, because I always looked at it as, why would I want to do something and do it really good for someone who is not treating me well or is not looking at like what I'm really doing. I'm working really hard. For me, I could deal with it. He's my dad. Like, it is what it is. But I
Right.
know with other people, like, people were going to leave if this is how it was going to continue to be. So I'm a very open, honest, transparent, probably too transparent type of leader. But I like to be that way because I want people to know what we're doing, what we're thinking. We like to listen to them, have an open door policy. Obviously, like at the size that we're at now, I have to be a little careful with some of that because some of these people I've worked alongside for a long time and we've become friends, and you don't want to muddy that or
Right.
have it look different within the company. Because, early on, some of these people, they know that I've worked with them, but as you continue to get bigger, they might be like, oh, Kristy's hanging out with this person and that person. So I'm very careful about that now. But yeah, I mean, I love to listen to people. I love to hear what they have to say. I kind of like to sit back. I'll give my input, but I want to hear everyone else's input and what they think. They're doing it every day. I'm removed from it now for a long time. And I just want other people to help grow the business and what they think. And I think that that's the best way to do it. Include people, include, the whole group in different ways so that they can kind of help build the company and they know that they're a part of that. Because I think when people know they're a part of that, they're listened to, they feel heard, I think that they're going to do a better job, and I really try to do everything I can to take care of our people. It might not be like $1 billion company, some of the things they have, but in different ways for our size, whether it's taking care of their health and making sure, we bring in a massage therapist and these little things. Some people don't care about that, but anything to make them feel more relaxed. I know it's a high stress, high volume type environment.
Oh yeah.
And I also like to do surveys to get feedback from them. Are we doing a good job? What can we do? And I really take that information to heart, especially if someone's not happy with something. I think the hardest thing is, people that haven't sat in your position understand the challenges of running a business, owning a business, and all the things that you've had to go through. But I will say I put my people first before anything. Leadership in general puts all the other people first before we take care of ourselves.
I love it. There were so many things you mentioned there that I want to revisit. The last point, though, people first. Transportation is a tough job. It is stressful. Even if you do everything right, you're typically always wrong. Like there's just something
Right.
going on. It's crazy. And when the people you work with know that you care and that you're willing to invest in them, they are going to work so much harder. They feel so much more tied to the business, but they are our differentiator. That customers can go to a lot of people to get similar services. The ability to execute might be different, but the service, hey, it's transportation. I'm going to get it from point A to point B. If my people are better, if they're happier, if they're able to facilitate those things more efficiently for their customers because they know we have their back, we're going to grow. It's just simple like that. And so I love that you all spend a lot of time investing in your people because they are the front line for your customers and what makes you different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a reason why we've had so many people that have stayed with us for so long, too, because they know how I am. I'm very giving, very transparent about everything I want. I don't want anything to be a surprise for them. So, and at the end of the day, too, like I'm building this because I want to be able to give back eventually if I were to sell the business or whatnot, so that all the people that helped me get here get something out of it as well. It's not just
That's,
about me.
that's huge. It's a team effort. There's
Yeah.
a lot of people have dedicated a lot of time for 20 plus years helping to build the business into what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
You mentioned two things earlier. One about your style of leadership, which open, transparent, more collaborative. We've all worked with people that are too strict or too harsh, where it's like, man, that's kind of a lot, right? I'm doing everything I can to make this work, and the feedback is not very encouraging.
right.
You mentioned that, maybe you saw your dad be strict and you wanted to kind of pivot that. Do you see that same tone along the lines with your executive team and your directors, like very open, more supportive with their teams?
Absolutely. I can tell you from the top down, because most of those people have been with me 14, 15 years on. They know exactly what my expectations are and how we deal with everyone. Do the right thing at the end of the day is important to me, and treating people like humans.
Yeah.
I think that is so important. Like I said, it was fine the way my dad treated me. I think it made me tougher. I might not have been who I am today if he didn't, to be honest. But I think when it comes to the other people, it definitely resonates down through the chain into the groups. I'm still close to it because a lot of people that work for me have been there a long time. So I will hear things that are
Yeah.
going on. And so I know that that's how we do it. And even when we talk from a leadership team, it's kind of like, hey, we could do it this way, but this is the Knichel way.
Yeah.
This is how we treat people. This is how we go through the process and not just make a rash decision, even if it's letting someone go. It's like making sure it's the right way and not just doing a rash decision.
Respect. I love to hear that. And obviously, you've built a strong group, leaders, and the team that manage the business and do things the right way, which is certainly differentiated because not everybody makes decisions like that. And sometimes, quick
Yeah.
draw, do stuff, and the ramifications are not very positive.
Yeah. That's how my dad was. He was instant to make a decision without like really discussing anything. And I just saw the damage that it caused. And I think that was the biggest thing, right? Like living it. And that's why I tell people like he taught me as a mentor what not to do
Yeah,
as a
totally.
leader. So
I, it's funny. I've seen it. I think I've had some counterparts and people I've worked with where I'm like, whew, that could never be me, but I'm glad I got a chance to see it so I know what I would not do.
right, exactly. You live and you learn.
Totally. So you mentioned something earlier that I love, and I see this from afar, still getting to know you as an owner, a business owner, a leader, but you're an incredible leader for women entrepreneurs. I see you out there doing a ton, speaking on different panels. Does that drive a lot of the stuff that you do as an owner and a leader in the space? Because I'm all for it. I love it. It gets me hyped up. I love to see it from my vantage point, but it seems like that is very important to you.
Yeah, it's extremely important to me because being so young in the industry as a woman, it was really tough. And it's gotten a lot better, being the only woman in the room. Like I just came back from the Union Pacific and there was 5 of us women there. And there's only 2 women owners that are actually there out of those women. And there's 60 plus other men in
Right.
the room. So to me, it's important to not only get the word out, but be a mentor to other women to help them along the way so that they don't make the same mistakes that I made. And just kind of build, we call it, Nicole Glenn and I call it building the tribe.
Yeah.
So that you have women around you that you can go to and talk to. I feel like it shouldn't be that way, but it just was that way. So now it's evolving to a lot better situation, I think, for women out there. Not that there still aren't struggles, but it's extremely important to me. It has driven women-owned agents that want to work for me, people, women that want to work for me, people that just want to reach out because I inspired them. And I didn't have that growing up in the industry. I feel like I was one of the first women putting myself out there, to be honest, in our space, at least in the
Yeah.
circle I was in.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were watching me and what I was doing. So I just feel like giving back is huge. Like as you become more successful, whatever way you can give back, I think is so important, to not only just be humble, but just to help the industry, to help other individuals.
2 things you mentioned that I love. The first was it is that way, right? Maybe there aren't a lot of women that were in the spotlight early on. And you said, great, I'm going to step out and do my thing and lead and bring other people. But that's how it was. And I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to do my thing and lift people up, right? I
Right.
love that because I have a hard time like accepting that things are the way they are, but not being willing to go do the work to make it different, right? This is how it is, but I got to go figure out a way to make it different. And I love that because you're leading from the front and bringing along so many people that look up to you. So
Right.
many people.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is even when I was speaking, I remember my first time speaking on the TIA stage, I won the Distinguished Woman in Logistics Award. And so many women were like, my story is just like yours. Like it made them step out of their shell to actually want to speak because someone like me was up there speaking that story and talking about it as if you couldn't talk about your struggles,
Yeah.
the issues. And I feel like if you don't talk about it, that's why I say transparent, right? Like my dad used to be like, "Oh, you said too much stuff, or you said stuff you shouldn't have said," and I'm like, "No." Like, I would stop sending him some of this stuff because I'm like, "This stuff needs to be said. Like, people
Yep.
need to hear." Maybe he didn't like to hear some of the stuff about him, and I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but like at the end of the day, I feel like everyone needs that person, and I didn't have that person, so I just did it myself, and then eventually was able to build up a community because of it. So yeah, I mean, I just think it's so important because we're the people that everyone looks at, right? To make a difference, to like be that inspiring person, and
Oh, yeah.
don't do that. Like, what are we doing? I feel like,
I agree. And the other part about it is it's hard for someone that is maybe early on in their freight journey or early on in their career in general if they don't see people ahead of them that look like them that they can relate to. And
right,
so there's young, female entrepreneurs or people in transportation, women in transportation today looking up at you going, that could be me. But if you weren't there, they might not think that that is their
right.
reality.
Yeah, because even telling my story, like you already heard, like quitting college, and yes, I had an opportunity not many people would get, but I still had to do it. I
Oh,
still had
yeah.
to figure it out. So people can make something out of themselves, whether they have a degree or not. It's putting the time and effort in and figuring it out and reaching out. And I will say, over COVID, I think it created even more of an environment for people to talk and
Yeah.
connect. And once we were able to go back out and see people again, I think it was even a bigger community now. And obviously it's just blown up since
Yeah.
then. So,
Awesome. Well, as someone that has watched it from afar, it's really cool to see. And I look forward to seeing you continue to lead from the front. It's amazing.
yeah, well, no, I definitely appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So, a couple things here before we wrap up. First is going to be any fun business related things to highlight that we can look out for from you and the team.
Oh my gosh, any fun things? Well, we are moving into a new building here in the next month.
Exciting.
Yeah, so to be quite honest, we started working above a beer distributor, then moved into this other building, which is you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Now we're finally moving into a professional building, and now we have rules we have to follow, which will be interesting and fun at the
Yeah.
same time. So,
What city is the new location in?
it's in Cranberry Township, PA. It's actually Westinghouse had their headquarters there.
Nice.
And yeah, so they've been subleasing all the space. So we're going into that building, and they have a daycare, they have a cafeteria, they have a gym,
So
all on
cool.
site. Yeah. So
Congratulations. That's a huge move.
yeah, taking care of the people,
Yeah.
what you can.
Awesome. Awesome. And then what is your favorite book?
I would say one of the most recent ones was Unreasonable Hospitality, specifically because one of my new values is customer obsessed, kind of like what you talked about earlier. Like we all do the same thing in a sense. What do we have that's different? And the biggest thing could be our customer service. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
got to be the top notch thing that we do. So it's a really good book.
I've not read that one, so I got to pick it up. I also lean into just doing everything you can to service customers. So I could probably learn a thing or two from that one.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for spending some time here telling us about your story. I'm fascinated around about your background and look forward to learning more. But thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.